Welcome back to Off the Air, the legacy of WFUV Sports. I'm Andrew Gulotta alongside Danny Scott, and we are joined by a very special guest. He's the media relations consultant at Fordham Athletics and is a part of the PR game night staff at MSG. He was formerly the director of athletic communications at St. John's as well, and also a WFUV Sports alum and Fordham alum, Andrew O'Connell. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing great. Very special guest. I said this off air, but I feel like I might be the least prestigious person to ever be on the FUV alumni podcast. It's like, oh yeah, we got all these guys doing games on national TV, and it's just like me sitting here. Hey guys.
No, definitely don't sell yourself short. And I think you have such an interesting path, especially just starting off with your childhood. I know your father, Jim O'Connell, was a Hall of Fame college basketball reporter for AP for 40 years. And from that, I'm assuming you have a very unique view on the sports reporting industry from a young age. So how was that process at a young age kind of, just even seeing the industry from, I guess, afar?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Growing up, you don't realize that the way you're growing up is not the way everybody else grows up. So my dad, you mentioned, was national college basketball writer at the Associated Press. He worked at AP from 78 until he died in 2017. He was still working, went to every Final Four from Magic Bird in 79. His last one was in 2017, 39 straight. He was a little too sick to go in 2018, the last one before he passed away. But yeah, it was one of those things where, growing up, I thought it, wasn't weird at all that I'd answer the phone at my house and it was like Jim Calhoun calling to talk to my dad or something like that. I never realized that other people had to like pay for tickets to go to games. It's like, no, don't you just like get the really good seats on the floor? Like, don't you know people? So it's one of those things where I was so spoiled rotten and I didn't even know it until I got to, come here. But it was one of those things where growing up, grew up around the game, loved the game. I think the thing that really got me more than anything, and this was because my dad was, I really learned to appreciate the stories behind the people, the coaches. So that's part of the reason why, I still love working in sports to this day. Not only are the games, being able to say, oh, I got to go to work, and like you're going to a game at the Garden or you're going to a game anywhere is pretty great. But being able to be close to the people behind the game, I think that's what really, that's probably the thing I learned most from my dad that, I really keep living to this day.
And Andrew, I also understand your mom was quite the basketball player here at
she
Fordham.
Was incredible, and I got absolutely none of that talent in the hereditary. So I always laugh when people say, well, my mom, in 4 years at Fordham, she scored 2,548 points. Oh, wow. She grabbed 1,999 rebounds. She's the Fordham career leader in blocks. Remind me to go back to the career rebounds because that's actually a pretty good story. She's the career leader in blocks, and neither of her two sons made the high school freshman team. So she never has voiced her disappointment. I mean, I would have very frequently. But my brother and I, we got the height, but we didn't really get the touch. I guess we should have had a hoop in the driveway like everyone else. But, yeah, she was a heck of a player, came from a great family. Her oldest brother, Bobby, my uncle, he played at Manhattan from 68 to 72. So she's one of seven. My uncle Chris played at LIU, and his two sons, Kevin and Sean, were both very good at Fordham Prep. They were actually valedictorians at Fordham Prep 3 years apart from each other. Sean played at Princeton. He was on the 96 team that beat UCLA. When his senior year, they got up to, number 8 in the country, I think it was. Kevin was a pretty good player at Prep. He played D3 at Haverford. And then it was my brother James and I just kind of, sitting there picking our nose on the sidelines. But, yeah, she was a heck of a player. And going back to the 1,999 career rebounds, she was one short of 2,000. Her last game, this was pre-NCAA. My mom played 76 to 80. And there was this thing called the AIAW, and they used to have regional tournaments and state tournaments and have consolation games. So it was the consolation game of the New York State tournament. And somebody comes over with about 5 minutes to go in the game and goes, Annie's got 1996. She's 4 away from 2000. So it doesn't matter. Season's over. It's a consolation game. Her teammates start throwing up bricks, trying to get her. So she has 1999. Her teammate throws one up. She goes up, gets it, gets 2,000, comes down. The ref banged her for an over the back.
Oh, my God.
It was her 5th foul. She fouled out. So that was her last game. And then it's funny. I always joke with this, with people working on the statistical side of it now. Is
they can't get a stat correction in there?
That's what I'm saying is, like, we're wrong so often. Somebody couldn't have just been wrong earlier in the game. Like, you had to leave her on 1999. But 1999 is, it's got its own cool little story. She was the leading rebounder in women's college basketball history up until about 2009. I believe it was Courtney Parrish at Oklahoma was the first one to get 2,000. But yeah, she was a pretty good player. She had a game her freshman year. She had 36 points and 32 rebounds in Alumni Hall, now Carnesec Arena.
Wow.
So every time when I was working at St. John's, I'd walk out in the gym and be like, hey, my mom's got a record that's never going to be touched here. When somebody would get like a 15-rebound game, be like, oh, that's cool, only 17 away from my mom.
Exactly, yeah. That's definitely really interesting. It seems like you have a lot of ties to Fordham and just like the New York City area as a whole. So was coming to Fordham and at least looking at it when you were kind of deciding your college process, was that kind of almost a no-brainer to at least, look at Fordham very seriously?
Yeah, so it was one of my mom went to Fordham. My mom and my dad actually met at Fordham here. So the other connection is that they met. My dad was the SID here from 76 to 78, right when he got out of school. And then that's where he met my mom, and then, it's kind of history from there. And it was, very New York-centric, my entire family. My mom grew up in Parkchester here in the Bronx. My dad grew up in Queens Village. I grew up in Elmont, New York, which is the first town into Nassau from Queens. Found out after the fact that the only reason my parents moved from Queens to the first town in Nassau was because when my brother was going to be born in 1986, Queens wasn't wired for cable television yet, and my dad really wanted cable TV, so that's why they went 3 minutes over the border, and that's why I technically grew up on Long Island. But yeah, my dad was a St. John's alum. Mom went to Fordham. Those were kind of the last two schools that I was looking at. Actually, for the longest time, wanted to go to school in Boston. Was going to go to BU, and then, funny enough, I came here my senior year for an accepted students day or something like that, and I just remember Father McShane giving this speech to all the accepted students, and he was the most gifted speaker I've ever been around. Just blew me away. I did actually in this on this very floor in one of the basement classrooms at Keating that same day, Professor Beth Noble, who I'm sure you guys have worked with at some point here, communications professor. She did a mock class on interviewing, and it just was, I was like, all right, man, I got to go here. So it was one of those things, had to get through a few financial hurdles, but started here in the fall of 2008, and it's been probably the best decision I ever made.
So when you were coming here, did you know exactly that you were going to join FUV right away,
Oh,
or was
no,
that something you just stumbled upon?
Not even a little bit. So it was one of those things where, growing up the son of a writer, and I thought I was pretty good at the time. I mean, I thought I'd have a Pulitzer by the time I was 26, no question. I decided I was going to be a writer, and everyone would say, oh, you got to go work at FUV. I was actually very good family friends. My dad and Mike Breen were incredibly close. So everyone always said, oh, you got to go work at FUV, but I just thought it wasn't going to be me. Like, I was going to be, the voice of a journalistic generation. But I just happened to my time in college happened to coincide with 2008, which really kind of messed everything up there. So I didn't really do anything my freshman year. I worked in the sports information office, which is how I got to. As soon as I knew I was coming to Fordham, my dad called Joe DeBarry, and I was fortunate enough that from the day I stepped foot on campus as a freshman until the day I left, I worked in the sports info office. But I didn't sign up for FUV my freshman year. Sophomore year, I wasn't going to either, and a roommate of mine, he was really big into music. Then he sold out, and now he's a real estate lawyer. But he's like, oh, I got to go, work at FUV for music. So in Keating, third floor in the auditorium, they had this big, FUV informational workshop. And so he was there. I was sitting with him. I was kind of just like zoning out. And then Bob Aaron sees me. Bob knew of me. My dad was a guest on One-on-One a million times. It was pretty much every selection. The Saturday before Selection Sunday, Bob would guilt my dad into coming on for way too long with a bunch of college kids. And he wouldn't let me leave the room. Bob in his, he's very agile for a man of his age and size. Kind of cornered me. He's like, "You're Andrew." And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, "So you're signing up for sports?" And I was like, "All right, yeah, sure." I was like, "I'll take a few of the workshops, like whatever." And then, a funny enough story about that, and this is just, to me, the most quintessential, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about Bob Aarons at some point, but the most quintessential Bob Aarons story of all time is about 3 weeks after that. I go through a few of the workshops. I'm like, you know what? Like, I don't really want to work in radio. Like, I got too much other stuff going on. Like, there's not enough time for this. So I decide I'm going to go in and I'm going to quit. So I walk down into Bob's office, which I'm assuming is Bob, the one all the way at the end of the hallway on the right. I knock on the door. He's in there with Brian Clark, who was the sports manager, and Chris Coagliato, who was the assistant sports manager at the time. And he's like, Andrew, what's going on? I say, I really don't have enough time for this. That's my favorite thing is college kids think they don't have any free time. Like, just give it a little bit. Like, you have no idea how much free time you have right now. So he kicks Chris and Brian out of the room, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but all I know is I walked out of that room. I had gone in to quit, and I walked out, signed up for like 14 other things. I was on the RIS for a demo for football. I was like, what happened? I came in here to quit, and Bob made me invest so much more time. But thank God he did, because the next 3 years were incredible. It's so much fun. I made so many friends here. Had just such an incredible time working, especially with, football and basketball. So, yeah, I did definitely not come on campus looking to work at WFUV, but luckily for me, Bob is Bob, and I was very lucky that he persisted. I was able to come, host one-on-one. I did color for football, basketball. I wasn't good enough to do play-by-play. And we had two incredible play-by-play guys my year, Kyle Kessis and Ricky Soprano. So I was able to do, as a matter of fact, I can hear myself talking right now. Bob would be yelling at me that I'm speaking too fast. So I'm going to try to slow down. But, yeah, thank God he did, because it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
And you mentioned that, you had like that, 2-week period where you thought you were, going to quit and, it didn't wasn't working out to start. Was there any moment after that where it clicked and you're like, okay, I belong here? And
it was kind of just, a slow, gradual process. It was just keep coming, and then, got behind the mic for the first time. We used to do mock one-on-ones, which I'm sure I don't know if you guys still do it, but I remember you have to do a half-hour mock one-on-one, and it was like, oh my God, how am I going to talk for a half hour? And then by the end, 3 hours flies by like nothing. So, it never really clicked, but just, over the next couple of years, you kind of just get more ingrained in the culture and the history. And like I said, best thing that ever happened to me was coming and working here.
So you talk about wanting to be a writer when you were coming in and anything like all that stuff. Did you do other clubs on campus? Did you write for the Ram? Did you write for any of the other papers here?
No. So I was figuring this would probably be one of the questions that I asked, and just shows you that college kids are so stupid, man. And I was so stupid. I wanted to be a writer. I was going to be this great sports writer. I didn't write for the Ram. I took some journalism classes, but I was like, I'll find my way other ways. It's like you wanted to be a writer, but you didn't write for the student newspaper. Like, you are such an idiot. But yeah, didn't write for the Ram. My biggest thing that I did here was, I mentioned I worked in the sports information office for Joe DeBarry and Scott Kwiatkowski. That took up a lot of my time. I worked pretty much every game there. Would do a couple recaps for them, but other than that, it was really just kind of writing for school and things like that. Had some other kind of freelance gigs on the side, but yeah, in retrospect, God, I was so stupid. Like, what? Why didn't I go write for the newspaper? Like, that made absolutely no sense.
And you were talking about you wanted to be a reporter. Obviously, beat reporting at WFUV is kind of one of the integral parts of the experience.
Definitely.
Was that something where you learned a ton? And
I was the beat writer for the Devils. It's oddly enough, growing up the son of a sports writer, you have really kind of non-regional specific. So growing up on Long Island, I was very typical Long Island kid. I was a Boston Red Sox and New Jersey Devils fan. But coming here, I was able, get in and be the beat reporter for the Devils. That was, again, something I knew it was cool when I was doing it. I don't think I really appreciated how incredible of an opportunity that was until after the fact. The fact that, they're letting some 20-year-old kid who was putting on a shirt and tie for the first time and God only knows how long to come in here and sit in the press conference with just absolutely incredible writers and real professionals. And that's something, again, that all the credit in the world to Bob Aarons fighting tooth and nail to get FUV guys credentials. That was an incredible experience getting able to do that. I did some other events, and so Devils was my big thing. Any college football games that were around, I did the first Pinstripe Bowl. I was credentialed for that. Army played Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium 2 one time. I was credentialed for that. Got to when the Barclays was in Jersey, the golf tournament one time, I was able to go and be credentialed for that. That was, again, one of those things you don't really appreciate in the moment, but it's just what a tremendous opportunity for, as I just mentioned, an idiot college kid to get to go be, a professional beat reporter with all these other people that actually know what they're doing.
So all those moments kind of sound like your favorite moments? Like, you look back on them with very fond memories, but was there a single moment that you kind of went, oh my gosh, I kind of fit into this industry? Like, I can make a name for myself potentially doing something in the sports industry.
I never really thought I was going to make a name for myself. I remember thinking pretty early on that seeing that the path forward was, seeing how the guys would do it. Unless you're a Spiro Ditas or a Ryan Rucco, you're probably going and doing single-A baseball in Amarillo, Texas for, just a couple of years. And I never really thought that was going to be me. I always thought that I wanted to do something more, New York, Northeast-centric. But in terms of when I realized that, I wouldn't say I was good at this and I fit in, but I probably wasn't terrible. So my senior year, myself and Ricky Sobrano, who I mentioned earlier, we were doing play-by-play in color for a Fordham game against St. Bonaventure at the Rose Hill Gym. And it's about late in the first half. Fordham puts up a shot, misses it, and Chris Gaston and Ryan Canty both jump up to try to go for a putback dunk. They both miss the ball, but they both grab the rim and somehow pull down all 500 combined pounds of themselves on the rim, snap the rim. We didn't have a backup rim.
Oh.
So for 58 minutes until they were able to figure it out, Ricky Sobrano and I had to just talk.
Yeah.
Fill the air. I think we went back for about 7 or 8 updates. But yeah, we just had to talk. And it was one of those things, once we got there, I was like, oh, that wasn't as terrible as it could have been.
Yeah.
So, only took until about, that was probably my third to last broadcast for FUV. But yeah, that's about when I would say I felt that way.
And you mentioned Bob Aarons a lot, and
Yeah.
how he kind of helped you grow through sophomore year all the way to when you ended up graduating. Was there anything in specific that you remember that you took when you ended up leaving FUV and end up going and setting on your career?
Just a sense of professionalism. That was something he always instilled in us. You weren't allowed to go anywhere representing WFUV without a shirt and tie, and it was and a jacket too. It was one of those things where, in the moment, you're kind of like, this is stupid. Like, why can't I just wear a sweater? And then working in the industry and seeing how important that is, and just ingraining in us from such an early point in your career that, you might not do everything the same, but there's a right way to do things and there's a wrong way to do things. The professionalism in the dress, God help you if you didn't get to a game 2 hours beforehand that you were doing the broadcast. Like, if you walked in an hour 45 before and Bob found out, that was it. Yeah, that was my big thing. Just kind of, the sense of professionalism and making sure that if you act like you belong there, you're gonna belong there. I remember when I was doing the Devils, Stan Fischler, legendary hockey, commentator, and I was kind of sitting off by myself. Our seat was all the way down on the right. It was basically the last possible seat you could have in the press box. And he walked up to me and he goes, "Who are you?" And I go, "Oh, I'm Andrew O'Connell, WFUV." And he goes, "You WFUV guys always look the part." And then he walked away, and I was like, and that's something you didn't realize, you didn't understand at the time, but that is so important. And that's something that Bob always harped on. Might not have realized why he was doing it at the time, but then, go back a few years later, now I see a kid walk in, and if he's, not wearing a jacket and tie, I'm like, who's this jabroni? Get him out of here.
I want to transition now to a little bit afterlife here at Fordham.
Yeah.
So right after you graduate, you start right here at Fordham. How weird was that, not actually leaving and just kind of staying where
so
you
there
went to
was
school?
there was a bit of a gap for me. So I finished in 3.5 years. I had some college credits from high school, but I was suave enough to convince my parents to let me sign a year-long lease. So I was, as a matter of fact, I'm still not sure if it was allowed by the rules of what I was doing, so I apologize to anyone at FUV listening to this, but when I was doing all the broadcast second semester senior year, I had already graduated technically. So I was just living on Belmont Avenue, working games for FUV, and then in March of that year, I was lucky enough, through Fordham connections, through Jeff Fitzgerald, who's a WFUV alum, and through Professor Noble, who I mentioned earlier, I got a job as a news assistant was the title, as an assignment desk assistant at ABC News Radio in the city. So I started working there mid-March. It was 2 days after the Big East tournament ended. And I worked there through right after the election. So right after the election, Hurricane Sandy, that's when I was fortunate enough to come back here to Fordham. And the way kind of that scenario played out was I had been gone for a little while. I come up here to actually work a football game. I would come and work some games in my spare time because I was making a whopping $13 an hour at ABC News Radio, which really wasn't enough to pay the bills. Even though I didn't have any bills, they still couldn't pay them. So I knew that Mike Balestra, who had been in the position before me, had left. So I said to Joe DeBarry, who I was very close with, and I was like, hey, if I'd always wanted to, I'd always known in the back of my mind that I thought I could be an SID. I thought I would be good. So with no experience outside of being a student worker, I say to Joe, I'm like, hey, do you think, if I send in my resume, do you think I'd have a shot? And, he kind of just very matter of fact in that the Joe DeBarry time, he's like, we kind of look to hire somebody in this position who's at least been like an intern or a graduate assistant somewhere. It's like, oh, yeah, fine. Like, I get it. And then I guess the applicant pool wasn't that great. So he called me back about 3 weeks later. He's like, why don't you send me your resume? So I came up here, I interviewed. I was fortunate enough that they offered me the job. And so this was November of 2012. I started working. I was the contact for the women's basketball team and the softball team and volleyball, which happened to coincide. Could not have been better timing. It was Coach Gately's second year, which was the year they won, I believe it was 23 games, were one off-ball offensive foul away from winning the Atlantic 10 title. It's funny enough, I actually saw that referee the other day, and every time I see him, I still think it's like. So this is what it was. Fordham's down 1, about 7 seconds to go, has the ball, has the chance to win on this possession. And referee called Sam Clark, she hooked a little bit, but called an off-ball offensive foul in the final possession of the game, turnover. St. Joe's, I'm still, 10 years later, I'm still so angry. But that team was incredible, being able to, 22 years old, kind of running the publicity for a team that was having just an incredible turnaround. They hadn't had a winning season in 20 years. They hadn't had a 20-win season since the 90s. It was, and being able to do that, it was kind of just the most amazing initiation by fire. We were able to kind of get, I didn't do much. It was the team that sold itself. But, we were able to get some publicity. We had an ESPNW article. We had, unsurprisingly, somebody from the Associated Press came and wrote a story, Doug Feinberg, who I just happened to be very close with since I was a teenager through my dad. Bruce Beck came and did a bunch for NBC, and then that team ended up making the round of 16 in the NIT. And then my last year, we won the A10, and it was just being able to just be along for the ride with that, with a group of incredible young women, great coaching staff. That was really when I thought to myself, this is what I thought I knew what I wanted to do, and then those 2 years, okay, this is what I want to do. Those 2 years coming back and working at Fordham, it was a little weird, trying to, be professional in your early 20s, thinking you're, a big shot because you're wearing a collared shirt one time, and then seeing all the kids that you were friends with still going to school. That was a little strange, but yeah, my experience those first 2 years here was incredible and really kind of laid the foundation for what I was able to do, over the subsequent years.
And I know you had experience through your dad just around college basketball. It seems like you were always around college basketball as a kid. But how, when you were SID, how did you find it working in that college athletic setting, and what really clicked for you in that respect?
It was just so much fun. Like I said before, being around the coaches and coaching staffs, a lot of the time, you can get a few bad ones, but I was lucky that I was always happened to be around great ones. Being able to travel with the team and getting to know the kids, and just being around college athletics in general is just, it's a lot of fun. It's one of those things where, I don't think I've ever had a day in my career where I wake up and dread going into the office. I was one of those few people during COVID who I was itching to, get back, because when you're when you're working in sports and you're not around people, that's when it stops being fun. But being able to work in sports, even just conversations like this, like these are the things that are, really tremendous in my eyes, and the reason why I want to keep doing this. And I've never really thought about doing anything else.
So after you leave Fordham, you go to St. John's, which, as far as basketball is concerned, is a little bit of a step up. What was that transition like, going from Fordham to St. John's?
So it's funny where you say it's a step up. So I made that jump right after the 13-14 academic year, which was the first year post realignment. So I've always known, like, I loved working with the women's teams and everything, but I always knew I wanted to work in men's college basketball. So that year, 13-14, that was when the A-10 hit its, and this is going to sound crazy to say given the layout of the league this year, but they had 6 bids. That was without Xavier. That was without Temple. The A-10 got 6 teams in the NCAA tournament. The first year of the realigned Big East with Creighton, Xavier, Butler, they got 4, and they only got 4 because Providence won the Big East tournament, and there was a stretch during the year where it looked like it was going to be a 2-bid league. So there was a lot of talk then where, oh my God, is the Big East going to be able to survive? Is the Catholic 7 plus these 3? And, the A-10 looked like it was poised to make this jump, potentially be the 6th best conference in the country. So I remember when I was making that decision, I was like, man, do I really want to go over to the Big East now? Like, is it going to work? And thank God, thank God I did, because the Big East, and I'm not just saying this because I work there, I'm saying this because I truly believe it, is the best conference in the country from a basketball standpoint, top to bottom. It's so easy to look at the Big 12 and be like, well, look what they got. But top to bottom, there is nothing like the Big East in terms of competitive structure, where 11 could beat 1 on any given day, still have the true round robin, which I think that every conference in the country should be required to do. You play everybody home, everybody away. It could not be more perfect from a competition standpoint. So being able, and I really do, and this is not to knock the A-10, but like I love the Big East more than anything. There's no conference I would rather just turn on a random night. You kind of forget what FS1 is on your channel tuner from March until college basketball starts up again in November, but just top to bottom, the competitiveness of the league, the history of the league, especially now that UConn's back in it. Yeah. I know there are a lot of Big East fans who wanted them to kind of, let them wither away in obscurity, but there's nothing better than having them back in the fold, and it just has kind of that old school feel. It's the having a conference of metropolitan in the sense that everybody's around a big city, with the exception of Connecticut again now. Predominantly Catholic schools that were willing to take a bet and say, you know what, we don't need football. We can do this on our own. We were a basketball conference at the start. We can be a basketball conference now. And that was one of the big champions of that, aside from, I'm completely blanking on the Georgetown president's name. The Georgetown president, who I'll probably remember his name immediately after we stop, and Father Brian Shanley, who was the president at Providence and is now the president at St. John's. They were really kind of the spearhead folks of, and Father Shanley told a story in when he was given kind of an employee seminar. You guys might be too young to remember, but about 10 years ago at this time, it was right when Temple, a little over 10 years ago, it was announced that Temple was going to come to the Big East. Basically, what you now know is the American Athletic Conference. Mm-hmm. All those schools were going to come to the Big East. It was going to be like a 22 team super conference. Boise State was going to be in for football. It was going to be ridiculous. Like Houston was going to be in it. So they were sitting around at a Big East President's meeting, and everybody always picks on East Carolina, but like the straw that broke the camel's back, they're like, we're going to have to go play basketball at East Carolina. Like, absolutely not. Like, we are breaking off. We're doing our own thing. They made a huge bet on it, and they went and got could not have 3 more perfect schools to fit with the mold of that. Basketball first, in 2 of them Jesuits, and Xavier and Creighton, people with absolutely maniacal fan bases. Then you go to Butler, where they have so much history and it fits in with everything. And the folks that work at the Big East are just Val Ackerman is the best conference commissioner in the country, and it's not even a question. the fact that she's been able to spearhead that conference from its creation into, what it is now, and kind of shepherd them through so many waters where no one thought they were going to be able to kind of survive. She is the best college administrator in the country, and to me, it's not even a question. The folks that also work at the Big East office, John Paquette, Pam Flanke, everyone in there, Kristen Quinn, who worked there, who was my boss here, and then worked there, just people who truly believe that a conference centered around college basketball can compete with the best of them. Going to work at the Big East, it seemed like a bit of a bet at the time, but probably one of the best bets I ever made. And then another reason that I went at that time was because St. John's women's basketball at the time I went had they had just been to their 5th straight NCAA tournament. It was one of those things where it seemed like I had worked for kind of the upstart program. Now can I go, kind of do the same thing for a program that's really established, has really kind of, proven itself, cemented itself within the landscape of college basketball. And the workload was pretty light. I went from having 4 sports here to 2 sports over at St. John's. But I quickly found out that you do way more work when you have the 2 sports than when you have 4. The move to St. John's was something I really struggled with at the time. I remember I went into Coach Pecora's office, and I was like, "What do you think I should do?" And he's like, "Hey, you got to go. Like, why wouldn't you go to St. John's?" It's one of those things where I can say this as a Fordham guy who obviously loves Fordham, but St. John's, from just a general New York publicity standpoint, it's still number one, and it'll always be number one, no matter how far removed from 1985 it gets. They play in the Garden. They got, in the New York media mindset, that's still number one. Now, maybe if the Rams, finish out, we'll just win out, we'll go like 30-1, maybe we'll get the Zach Brazili here from the Post.
That's for sure. And obviously you've returned to Fordham
as
the media relations consultant. A, how did that come about? And B, what does your day-to-day look like as now, media
day-to-day is kind of a loaded question. I'm sitting here with you at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. No, but it was funny enough, I had actually applied for another job here. It was a senior associate AD role that I was totally unqualified for. But I had interviewed, and then Eddie Cull, the athletic director who I had worked with at St. John's when I first started there, he sent me an email after the fact, we love you, just not for this position. We'd love to get you up here someday. And I thought he was just kind of like pulling my leg, like, oh, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, I'll get up there. Don't worry about it. And then I saw him a couple months later, and he was like, hey, what do you think about, a consultant role? So I hadn't really thought about it until then. Luckily we were able to make it work. They were just looking for, Ed, I think something that he really understands and has been great for the university is he just wants to get people here. He wants to get people that can help, people that want to be here, people that'll be good for Fordham. And I was lucky enough that he thought I was one of those people. So we had met. He extended the offer. Again, it was a tough decision. I'd been at St. John's for 8 years. I'd really made a lot of great relationships over there, a lot of great people. But it's you hear coaches say it all the time. The allure of coming back to your alma mater is really something. Now, mine might have been at about 1/100th of the pay scale of what those coaches are getting. But there really is kind of, an allure, a pull of coming back to your alma mater. I had, before I had even gotten the offer from Ed, I had come back to work a few games for Joe and Scott. And I hadn't been on campus in a long time. And then, I park in the garage, I start walking up, I see Keating, which anyone who's never been here, my God, this is the most beautiful building in America. So, you kind of feel that. I was like, man, it'd be really cool to come back here. And then, so when that opportunity presented itself, I was able, some personal circumstances made me able to take it on. So, I figured why not? It's been great. It's been about 6 weeks. Things are a little different. Having the gym kind of gutted and the McGinley Center is no longer McGinley Center. So it's been, finding the lay of the land's a little different. But it was funny when we were walking down here, Andrew. The studio looks exactly the same with the exception of these cameras.
Yeah.
Which, they always say face for radio. I don't know who decided to put cameras in here. Like, I haven't worked out in like 4 years. Could have given me a heads up that there were going to be cameras. Would have ironed my shirt.
So I know you also do work for MSG. Can you talk about what you do for that?
Oh, it's the greatest racket of all time. So I've done that since I was a junior at Fordham, working for Larry Torres, who's the director of public relations at MSG, long time. I started working there in the game night staff when I was a junior. Been doing it ever since. It's one of those things where, it's not Knicks or Rangers. It's pretty much anything else. So that's college basketball, championship boxing. They used to have a tennis event in there. And that's basically just go in for a game, do some kind of PR game night staff stuff. So helping out with quotes, setting up the chairs, running stats, doing stuff like that. And then basically just hanging out and watching a game. And I used to say this all the time when I was at St. John's as well, when we would play at the Garden. There is no cooler feeling in the world than walking into work and you're walking into Madison Square Garden. Like it's somewhere I always try to get to as early as humanly possible, because it's like kind of the closest thing I've had to a religious experience in quite some time. When you walk into an arena like that and it's you and maybe like 3 other people, and like you have Madison Square Garden to yourself, 19,812 seats, and then there's just me. It's incredible. And that's something where if you have the opportunity, and I would say to you too, going into arenas and gyms really early in the morning, or, in that kind of twilight when you're the only person there, there's no cooler feeling in the world. The Rose Hill Gym, when the light's coming in through the windows above the AD's office in the late afternoon or in the morning when, well, actually, now that they have those banners up, you can't really see anything, but it really does feel like you're in church pretty early in the day, and there's just nothing that beats that. But yeah, my gig at Madison Square Garden is, it's not the most lucrative thing in the world or anything like that. I don't want you to think I'm this higher up at MSG. It's basically I show up, type up some quotes, hand out stats, and they let me watch the game. But it's so much fun, and they'll have to take that job from my cold dead hands.
That's awesome. Before we let you go, Adrian, I just have one last question for you. Obviously, people listening to this podcast, usually the last question is always about asking some advice to give to either a student or maybe
you don't want
as a
my
past
advice,
student. What's one thing you would say to someone, that's either just starting FUV or maybe looking to graduate and, start their professional career?
Here's something I would say to the FUV guys now, and I used to say this at St. John's. We had graduate assistants who had kind of 2-year appointmentships. They were a couple of years older, but when you have a situation like you're in now at FUV, or a graduate assistantship, something with a defined end date, you should do everything in your power to make sure that whatever time you're there, you put every single ounce of what you had and got every single opportunity out of your limited time you have in this place. It's something where you can't really understand or appreciate it until you're no longer there. When your key fob stops working, it's like, oh man, this is like, I'll never have another chance to go do a game. I'll never have the chance to do another Fordham play-by-play game for FUV. I'll never have the chance to go cover another game as a beat reporter for FUV. I'll never have the chance to do something like that. And you're going to have a lot of, I should have done this. I should have done this differently. I'm still not cleared to do newscasts for FUV because I was just too lazy my sophomore year to go and record the practice ones. That's something that I still go back and kick myself. Like, how would my life have been different if I had some extra stuff on tape? Did I think I could have made it as a broadcaster? Probably not, but it's kind of your what if. Those are the things where being able to lay your head on the pillow at night and being like, I did everything I possibly could with the opportunity that was presented to me. I would say just do everything you can in that time because, life comes at you really fast. You're going to blink your eyes, and then, like me, I woke up this morning in Smithtown, New York with a wife and 2 kids and a dog, and I can't come in and just, go on the road with Fordham football for a weekend anymore. The opportunity comes and goes pretty quickly. So I think it's really important that when you're in it to kind of appreciate the fact that you're in it and just do every single thing possible to make the most out of that opportunity. And that is an incredibly do as I say, not as I do, because I was the laziest student worker in WFUV history.
The media relations consultant at Fordham Athletics and a WFUV sports alum, Andrew O'Connell. Thanks for joining us.
No, thanks, guys. This was fun.
Off the Air is a production of WFUV Sports.